I felt my hands go still on the steering wheel the moment I pulled into the driveway. Not shaking, still. The kind of still that comes when your body decides it's done reacting and starts calculating instead. My daughter was standing at the door of the house my son-in-law's family owned, not hers, never really hers, and even from 30 feet away, I could see she'd been crying. Not recently, hours ago. The kind of crying that dries up and leaves a person looking hollow. She was 31 years old, and she looked like a child waiting to be picked up from somewhere she never should have been. I'm 63. I worked 32 years at a sheet metal fabrication plant outside of Columbus, Ohio. Foreman for the last 14 of those years. I'm not a man who talks much about feelings, never have been. But I know what it looks like when someone has been slowly worn down, and I knew I was looking at it right then through my windshield. I got out of the truck and didn't say anything. Neither did she. I just put my arm around her shoulders and walked her inside. That was a Saturday in early November, 6 weeks before Christmas. I didn't know then that by Christmas everything would be different. I didn't know what I was about to learn, but I should have seen it coming. The signs had been there for 2 years. Her name is my daughter, and she is the best thing I've ever done with my life. Her mother passed when she was 11, breast cancer, fast and merciless, and after that it was just the two of us in a 3-bedroom house in Westerville. We figured it out together. She learned to do laundry because I burned everything. I learned to braid hair from a YouTube video at midnight because she had a school picture the next morning. We weren't perfect, but we were solid. She met her husband at a company event in Columbus. He was charming, well-dressed, said all the right things. His name was Brett. I'm going to call him that because that's his name, and he earned every syllable of what I'm about to say about him. Brett's father was a man named Whitfield Crowe. I will also use his full name because he deserves to have it attached to what he did. Whitfield Crowe was 67 years old, owned 3 commercial real estate companies in central Ohio and one in Scottsdale, Arizona. He had been photographed at charity galas. He sat on the board of a private hospital. He wore cufflinks to a casual Sunday lunch and expected you to notice them. The first time I met him, he shook my hand, smiled at me like I was a pleasant surprise he hadn't planned for, and then spent the next 4 hours talking exclusively to Brett. I told myself it was just his way. Some men are like that. I told myself a lot of things over the next 2 years. My daughter called me 3 or 4 times a week in those first months of the marriage. Then it became twice a week. Then once. Then I was calling her, and she'd answer. But she'd sound tired, careful, like she was choosing each word before she said it. That's not how she used to talk. She used to talk the way she ate, fast and without apology, always reaching for more. I asked her once, directly, if she was okay. She said yes. I asked her if Brett was treating her well. She paused for just a half second too long and then said, of course. I didn't push it. I should have. The dinner that changed everything happened on the first Saturday of December. Whitfield Crowe hosted what he called a family dinner at his house, a 12,000 square foot colonial in New Albany, Ohio, with a circular driveway and a wine cellar he mentioned within the first 10 minutes of every visit. There were 8 of us at the table, Whitfield at the head naturally, his wife Ma Jane at the other end, a woman so thoroughly trained to be pleasant that I don't think she remembered how to have an opinion anymore. Brett to Whitfield's right, my daughter beside Brett, then Brett's sister and her husband, then me at the far end beside Margene, which I understood immediately was not an accident. The seating arrangement at a table like that is a message. I was seated beside the woman who didn't matter so that I could be near the man who didn't matter either. The food was catered. A woman in a white jacket brought out the courses. Whitfield had selected a wine he described in specific terms. I won't pretend to remember, but the subtext was clear. This bottle cost more than your monthly grocery bill, and isn't that something? I drank water. The first hour was fine. Conversation about Brett's latest acquisition, a small office park in Dublin, Ohio. Whitfield spoke about it the way a father speaks about a son's Little League trophy, pride with just enough condescension to remind everyone else in the room that the achievement belonged partly to him. My daughter smiled and nodded. I watched her. Then the conversation turned. Whitfield asked me, with the particular smile of a man who already knows the answer and has decided it's amusing, whether I was still working at the plant. I told him I'd retired in the spring. He said, "Good timing. That industry doesn't have much of a future, does it?" Not a question. A pronouncement. He said it pleasantly, the way a doctor says something is benign but still worth monitoring. I said the industry had done right by me for 32 years. He smiled again and reached for his wine. Then Brett said something. "I want to be exact about this." He said, "Dad's been pretty generous helping out since the wedding, so we're in good shape." My daughter's eyes went to the tablecloth. I felt something shift in my chest, some gear rotating into a position it hadn't been in before, because I understood what Brett had just done. He had narrated, in front of his father, that the money in their household came from the Crows, not from my daughter, who had a master's degree in accounting and had been managing a financial portfolio for a regional investment firm for 6 years. Not from her. From them. I looked at my daughter. She was still looking at the tablecloth. I said calmly that my daughter had built a very solid career and I was proud of her. Whitfield said, "Oh, absolutely. She works hard." He said it the way you compliment a student who's not quite graduate school material but tries her best. My daughter said nothing. The next 20 minutes were ordinary. More food, more wine, a conversation about the Scottsdale property that I participated in, not at all. And then Whitfield made a comment about the market, something about timing, and my daughter, quietly but clearly, said that she actually disagreed. She said she'd been watching a particular segment of the commercial market for 8 months, and the numbers didn't support the optimism. The table went quiet. Whitfield looked at her the way you look at a child who has interrupted an adult conversation. He said, "Brett, did you teach her that?" Brett laughed. An actual laugh. Short, reflexive, the laugh of someone who knows which side of the room he lives on. My daughter picked up her wine glass. I don't know if she was going to drink from it or just hold it. She never got to find out, because Whitfield reached across the table, reached across and took the glass out of her hand. Not violently. Deliberately. The way you take a toy from a child who shouldn't have it. He set it down on his side of the table and said, "You've had enough. You get emotional." The table went completely silent. I put my fork down. There's a thing that happens to me when I get very angry. My vision gets clearer, not blurrier. Everything slows down. I notice details I wouldn't normally notice. The pattern on the tablecloth, the sound of the catering woman's footsteps in the kitchen, the way Brett was looking at his plate. I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I want to be clear about that, because what I did next required me not to raise my voice. I looked at Whitfield Crowe and I said, "I'd like to have a word with my daughter outside." He blinked. I don't think many people had stood up at his table and said anything to him in a very long time. My daughter started to say it was okay. I looked at her and she stopped. We walked out through the back door onto the patio. It was cold. December in Ohio. I could see our breath. She started to apologize. She said she knew it was awkward, that Whitfield was just like that she was fine. I said, "How long?" She looked at me. I said, "How long has it been like this?" She didn't answer right away. And then she did. And once she started, she couldn't stop. 2 years of it, I learned. Not in dramatic scenes, but in the 1,000 small ways a person gets erased. The jokes at her expense. The way Brett had stopped defending her. Not recently, within the first 6 months. The way her opinions were corrected when she spoke. The way she'd stopped speaking. The promotion she'd turned down because Brett said it would make her schedule too complicated. The savings accounts she'd liquidated because Brett said it made more sense to consolidate into his. She said it so matter-of-factly, the way you describe weather. "This is just how it is." My daughter, who had stood in our kitchen at age 14 and cooked dinner because I'd had a brutal shift and she'd wanted me to come home to something warm. My daughter, who had driven herself to college orientation alone because I'd had a work emergency and called me every hour with updates so I wouldn't feel guilty. My daughter, I listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, I said, "Okay." She said, "Okay what?" I said, "Okay, I'm going to take care of this." She told me not to cause a scene. I told her I wasn't going to cause a scene. And I meant that. I went back inside and I made 2 phone calls. Not 1, 2. I'm going to be honest about that. The first call was to a man I've known since 1987. His name is Edmund, and he's been a real estate attorney in Columbus for 35 years. We went to the same church for 20 years before he moved to Grandview Heights. I called him because Whitfield Crow's business existed in the same regulatory world that Edmund had spent a career navigating. I described what I'd observed over 2 years, the financial consolidation of my daughter's assets into joint accounts she didn't fully control, the timeline, the documented income she contributed. Edmund listened and then said 4 words: "Get her a notebook." The second call was to my daughter's colleague, a woman named Paula, someone my daughter had mentioned as a friend from her firm. I didn't have her number. I called my daughter's cell and asked for it. My daughter looked at me like I'd asked for something strange. I just repeated the request. She gave me the number. Paula answered on the 3rd ring, and I explained who I was. Paula was quiet for a moment, and then said she'd been worried about my daughter for a long time. She said she'd noticed things. I asked if she'd be willing to put some of those observations in writing. She said yes without hesitating. I want to explain something about the next 3 weeks because it wasn't cinematic. There was no confrontation scene, no moment where I walked into Whitfield Crow's office and delivered a speech. That's not how it actually works when you're serious about it. What happened over those 3 weeks was documentation. My daughter started the notebook Edmund had suggested. Dates, times, specific statements. She had a memory like a filing cabinet. Turns out you remember everything when it's been happening to you. She wrote 15 pages in 4 days. Edmund referred her to a family law attorney named Sylvia, who practiced in Columbus and had handled cases involving financial control within marriages. Sylvia reviewed what my daughter had written and what Paula had provided. She also reviewed the financial records my daughter had maintained, because my daughter is an accountant, and accountants keep records, and even when Brett had moved money around, there were traces. There were also business irregularities. This is where the second dimension came in. I'm not a businessman. I worked with sheet metal, not spreadsheets. But I had spent 32 years watching how operations run, and I know what cutting corners looks like. Over the previous 2 years, I had heard at dinners and in passing certain things about Whitfield Crow's commercial properties, lease agreements that didn't match public records, a renovation project on a Dublin property that had received a city permit for work that, based on a photograph my daughter had casually taken at a family event, did not appear to have been done. I described this to Edmund. Edmund said it wasn't his area, but he knew someone of the Ohio Department of Commerce who handled commercial property compliance. He made a call. That person asked for specifics. Edmund collected what I had and forwarded it. I'm not in a position to describe in detail what the investigation found because it was not my investigation. What I can tell you is that it found something. By the 3rd week of December, 3 things had happened simultaneously. Sylvia had filed paperwork on behalf of my daughter that initiated the process of establishing what assets were legally hers, including the retirement contributions she'd made for 6 years, the proceeds of a savings account she maintained before the marriage, and a professional bonus she'd received 18 months into the marriage that had been quietly moved. Sylvia described what had occurred as financial abuse within a marriage. That is a legal classification in Ohio. It matters. Brett's father received a notice of inquiry from a commercial property regulatory body. I don't know exactly what was in it. I know it arrived by certified mail at his New Albany address and also at the address of his Scottsdale LLC. I know because Edmund told me, and Edmund had heard from his contact. And my daughter left, not dramatically. She packed 2 bags and the financial records and her notebook, and she drove to my house on a Wednesday evening. She sat at my kitchen table, and I made her the same thing I made her every week when she was a kid. Scrambled eggs and toast, because it was the only thing I could reliably cook without burning. She ate the whole plate and asked for more. We didn't talk much that night. She knew I had things in motion. She trusted me. The holidays passed quietly. Just the 2 of us, same as it used to be, except now there was a legal process unfolding at the speed. Legal process unfolding at the speed legal processes actually move, which is slower than you want, but faster than the people on the other side expect. By February, Brett had retained his own attorney. By March, the divorce proceedings were formally underway. Sylvia was thorough. The documentation was solid. The financial picture that emerged from discovery was not flattering to Brett, and less flattering still once the regulators had begun their review of Whitfield's commercial holdings. I'm not going to claim Whitfield Crowe went to prison on my account. That would be overstating it. What I will say is that by April of the following year, one of his Ohio LLCs had been fined significantly by the state for permit violations and misrepresentation in a commercial lease filed with the county. His Scottsdale operation was under separate review by the Arizona Department of Real Estate. The fine alone was not catastrophic for a man of his wealth, but the review, the scrutiny, the attention of regulators, that was not something his reputation could absorb quietly. A board seat ended. A charity gala sponsorship was declined. The kind of invisible network of respect and access that men like Whitfield Crowe build over decades turns out to be very sensitive to the word under investigation. His son fared differently. Brett was not rich in his own right, not yet. He had been building toward inheriting something, and that something was now complicated. The divorce settlement, once finalized, returned to my daughter the full value of her premarital savings account, 6 years of retirement contributions, and the bonus. It was not a small number. My daughter is an accountant, as I mentioned. She had documented everything. She called me the morning after the settlement was finalized. It was a Tuesday. She said, "Dad, it's done." I said, "Good." She laughed a little, and that laugh, short, surprised by itself, was the first time in 2 years I heard her sound like herself. I've thought about that dinner a lot in the months since. The way Whitfield reached across the table and took that glass out of her hand, the deliberateness of it, the performance. He wanted her to feel small in front of the one person who couldn't know she was small. He wanted me to see it and understand that there was nothing I could do about it. He misunderstood me. I'm not a man with connections or money or cufflinks or a wine cellar. I am a retired foreman from a sheet metal plant who raised a daughter alone in a 3-bedroom house in Westerville. I'm 63 years old and I don't own anything worth impressing anyone with, but I raised a woman who keeps records. I raised a woman who had a colleague who cared enough to pick up the phone. And I spent 32 years learning that the difference between something breaking down and something holding together is almost never the dramatic moment. It's the slow, careful, correct work that happens before anyone is watching. I didn't take anything from Whitfield Crowe that he hadn't already built on someone else's foundation. I just made sure the ground beneath it was accurately measured. My daughter bought a condo in Grandview Heights last summer. She painted the kitchen herself, a deep green, the color she said she'd always wanted, but never picked because someone had told her it was too bold. She sent me a picture of it the day she finished. Just the kitchen wall, morning light, a coffee cup on the counter. I looked at that picture for a long time. That's what I fought for. Not a verdict, not a number, not the specific expression on Whitfield Crowe's face when the certified mail arrived. I fought for a green kitchen and a coffee cup in the morning light, and a daughter who picked the color herself. That's the whole of it. I've been thinking about what Whitfield Crowe thought he was doing that night. I don't think he thought he was being cruel. I think he thought he was being correct. That's the thing about men like him. They've spent so long surrounded by people who agree with them that the agreeing starts to feel like proof. He reached across that table and took my daughter's glass, because in his mind, that was simply what you did when someone beneath you stepped out of line. It wasn't anger, it was habit. And that, I've come to understand, is what makes it so much worse. There's something that happens over time when a person is slowly told, not shouted at, not struck, but told, quietly and consistently, that their judgment is wrong, that their success belongs to someone else, that their success belongs to someone else, that their voice is a problem to be managed. They start to believe it. Not all at once, in layers. My daughter is one of the sharpest people I know, and she still believed it. That's not weakness. That's just what prolonged, deliberate erosion does to a person. It works on the smart ones just as surely as anyone else. Because intelligence doesn't protect you from someone who's decided to make you doubt yourself every single day. What changed everything wasn't my phone calls. I want to be honest about that. The phone calls mattered, but they were only possible because of what my daughter had already been doing without knowing it. She had kept records. She had maintained friendships at work, even when her world was narrowing. She had, even in the middle of all of it, never fully stopped being herself. She just couldn't see that clearly from inside it. That's the part I come back to most. Whitfield built his empire on paperwork that didn't match reality. Brett built a marriage on a version of my daughter that wasn't real either. And when the actual records came out, hers, his, all of it, there was nothing to argue with. The truth had been sitting there the whole time, documented and waiting. I'm not a philosopher. I'm a retired foreman who can tell you exactly how long cold-rolled steel holds under stress before it gives. But I've learned that the same principle applies to people and to systems. You can misrepresent something for a long time. You can make it look like something it isn't. But load is load. Pressure finds the gap between what's claimed and what's real, and eventually the structure either corrects or it fails. Whitfield's structure failed because it was built on the assumption that no one would look closely enough. Brett's did too. My daughter painted her kitchen green. She picked the color alone, which sounds like nothing and is actually everything. I think about what I want her to carry forward from all of this, if she carries anything. Not bitterness, not distrust. I want her to carry the knowledge that she documented 6 years of her own life with enough precision to walk into a courtroom and get it back. That's not luck. That's discipline and care and the refusal, even when she was exhausted, to let her own story disappear. That's what protected her. Not me, her. Integrity is not a feeling. It's a practice. It's what you do when nobody's watching, when you're tired, when it seems like it won't matter. My daughter practiced it for 6 years inside a house where she was told she didn't matter. And when the moment came, it mattered enormously. Whitfield Crowe, with all his board seats and cufflinks and certified mail, found out the hard way that there is no substitute for having actually done the thing you claim to do. I'm 63 years old and I'm still learning that. I hope she never forgets it.